getting a very, like, Little Red Riding Hood grew up to be the evil queen kind of feeling. That's what I feel like right now. It feels good. I'm not hating it. Hello everybody, welcome back to Indie Book Club. As you can tell by my getup and my super awesome attempt at scenery setting, we are talking about fairy tales this month. And we are not only talking about fairy tales, we are talking about fairy tales, plural. That means two. That's right. We are discussing Deja Vu, The Realm Surfer by Sabrina Oyinloye and Matriarch by Adam Wing. That's right. Not only are we discussing two books, I got them both in paperback, which like never happens. So exciting. I do kind of wish they were the same size, but you know what? That's okay. They do kind of share the same color scheme though, like very blue and gray, and there's a woman on each one. Funny. So we begin as always with book summary, starting with Deja Vu, The Realm Surfer. A young woman named Ariel meets a strange man who tells her that she is not only his wife, but an angel as well. While she struggles to come to terms with his claims, and as she begins to manifest a strange ability to leap between place and time, a conflict between her husband and the fallen angels on Earth, led by his brother, threatens to destroy them both, and their missing daughter as well. Deja Vu, The Realm Surfer. Okay, that's book one. Now for Matriarch. An elderly woman on her deathbed relates to her great-granddaughter the story of how she and her husband, Oliver, met. A soldier who decided to remain in country after the Turkish War, Oliver stumbles upon an old couple whose farm has been beset by an evil creature. When he defeats the monster, he meets a djinn, who grants him 3 wishes. What follows is a cautionary tale for anyone who has been young, reckless, and desperate for love. So now is when I would normally go into why you should read these books. I'm going to do that at the end this time as part of like kind of a conclusion-y wrap-up thing. They're both really good. They're really entertaining. They're worth your time. The reason this whole kind of double feature thing came up is that when I was putting together the list for 2021, I noticed that both of these, well, one, I had too many books, so I knew I was going to have to double up somewhere. And two, I noticed that both of these happen to be listed as fairy tale fantasy on Amazon. And after reading those summaries, I was like, those sound like two extremely different books. How can they both possibly be fairy tale fantasy? So I thought this would be a good experiment to kind of talk about, you know, not their obvious differences, which are many, but what makes them the same and why you would classify both of them as fairy tales, both in terms of relation to each other and kind of in relation to your classic fairy tales, your Brothers Grimm, your Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales that everybody knows. In the end, I came up with 4 things of what seems to be the starting point, at least, of how we can classify both books with such different plots as fairy tales. So first of all, and I think it's pretty obvious by looking at these books, that the first point is they're both very short. They are to the point. They pretty much both focus on one storyline. There's not a lot of, you know, branching off in different directions. In Deja Vu, The Realm Surfer, your main character, your protagonist, your POV character is Ariel. She is the hero. You do switch between her and her husband. He gets a little bit of POV for himself, but for the most part, it's her. And then for Matriarch, it's a little bit different because it's a story within a story. It is a woman on her deathbed who is relating a story that she is a part of, but it's about her husband. So he's the main character, while she is also the main character. So that's a little bit different. The fact that each book and traditional fairy tales are so focused on the journey, a single journey of a single character, can be seen in the fact that a lot of fairy tales, including kind of these two, are named after their protagonists. Little Red Riding Hood, Pinocchio, the Snow Queen, the Little Mermaid. In this case, the Realm Surfer refers to Ariel. And in this one, again, not quite right on, but she is the one telling the story. In each case, they do follow the tradition of having one POV character, one single story that they're telling, and they tell it from beginning to end with very little tangents in between. The second thing they both have in common is both books acknowledge and invoke a higher power. For Deja Vu, it is God's will, just straight up the higher power, which is kind of embodied by some of the angels, the good angels, the ones that haven't fallen and aren't trying to start shit with God and with Ariel and her husband. Matriarch actually opens with a chapter talking about how human lives are acted upon by three different forces, fate, destiny, and doom. And doom is really the higher power that is invoked in this book. So not only are there higher powers invoked, they are also given, they're personified. They're given a sort of character and agency in the book. Doom is the character of the Jinn and maybe someone else, I'm not going to give it away. They personify and take on the persona of Doom, and the angels, Ariel and her husband, take on the persona of God's will in the war with the fallen. They also both have a supernatural creature as a villain, or at least as a bad actor in the situation. In traditional fairy tales, there aren't really obvious examples of the personification of a higher power, in that, God is not invoked in them, certainly. That's pretty singular to this, the Realm Surfer. But I mean, magical beings are everywhere, and they invoke, a lot of things like fate, Sleeping Beauty, this idea of destiny, she's going to prick her finger on the spindle and die, prophecy, that sort of thing. So while there isn't a personification of fate or God in the traditional tales, it's still very present, and the villains certainly, more often than not, have some kind of magic or enchantment that they use to get over on the heroes, at least for a little while. The other thing that's common about this is there's not a lot of gray area. In fairy tales, in these two fairy tales, in traditional fairy tales, you typically have a good side and a bad side. And there's not really a whole lot of the area in between. There's not a lot of, the wolf is fine. He just, ate a girl and her grandmother. Like, he had his reasons, There's not a whole lot of that going on. There's not a lot of situational morality in fairy tales. And that is true of Matriarch. Very, very strong and finite consequences meted out at the end of Matriarch. And the Realm Surfer, of course, because we're talking about a religion and more or less a traditional kind of Christian-based religion. Not a lot of gray in that either. So that's actually a big thing that kind of ties nicely the religious, more religious Deja Vu, the Realm Surfer, to the traditional fairy tale mythos, is this idea of good versus evil and very little wiggle room in between. Along those lines, traditional fairy tales have a moral. They are fables. They are, as this says right on the top, they're legends. And legends have a lesson at the end. That's why they exist, to educate and guide us mere mortals along the path of right. So, and again, that's very, very traditional in terms of the Grimm's brothers and all of those. I believe all of those actually end with and the moral of the story. Because if you know the traditional fairy tales, a lot of them do not end very happy. The hero does still win in those, I think fairly often. Heroes have a pretty good batting average when it comes to coming out on top for the Grimm's brothers, but sometimes not. And if the villains are losing at the end, they're losing real bad. It gets pretty ugly in those. The Realm Surfer, being a fallen angel, falling out of God's grace, there's not really anything worse that can happen to you. And the moral of that is obviously when you defy God's will, you're in for a bad time. However you feel about God, that's the moral of this story. I do want to point out that Deja Vu, the Realm Surfer, it may be a little bit preachy, but it's not subtle about it. It definitely has a point of view. It is very pro-God, pro following God's will for you, following that path. I didn't find it overbearing, but if you are not a fan of that sort of messaging, if it makes you uncomfortable, then you probably won't want to read it. Just, it is what it is. And then Matriarch, the lesson there is don't try to lie to a super powerful monster thing that grants wishes. Which I think is good advice and applicable in most situations. No, the moral of that is more if you are short-sighted and headstrong and you think you know everything, shit's gonna fall on you. You know, there's probably better ways to say this, but this is what I've got. I write contemporary horror, you know. I write lots of swearing and, you know, just nonsense. I don't write anything as, you know, lush and frankly as well put together as these. So I can't talk very, very well about them. And the final piece that seems to be present in most fairy tales, and these two in particular, is the romance component. Each story has a romantic story or a story of close relationship that is beset and has obstacles to overcome. Very obviously, in The Realm Surfer, it is Ariel and her husband. They have major obstacles to overcome. He has to find her through time and space and between heaven and earth, and she can't remember him, and then she does, and then there's a war, and it's very, you know, she is in peril and their daughter is in peril. It's very much they are fighting for their love, they are fighting for their principles, and it puts them at huge risk. And then Matriarch is all about love. It's all about a man, Oliver, who's traveling through the country, who realizes that what he's missing is someone to love, and he chases that idea to an end that essentially kind of destroys him. So, last question, do you need to have a happily ever after in order to be a fairy tale? Well, I will say that both of these books do have a happily ever after in them. Whether it comes at the end of the story or somewhere else, and the ending is different than a happily ever after, that is, that's something I'm not going to say. I'm just going to kind of allude to it. Go read the books and you'll find out. But as we know, as I said, fairy tales in the traditional sense didn't always have a happily ever after. It's certainly not for everybody. I think we know that Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother ended up getting eaten by the wolf. I think they're freed in the original, but it's not as clear-cut as maybe some of the nicer versions of the story are told. Snow White, she turns out okay, but her sisters end up in a pretty bad state, bloody-footed and burning-footed and pretty nasty. And blind, too, I want to say. You really got to think that the Grimm's brothers, like, hated women. Really, the moral of those stories is women are stupid. Wow, that's really depressing. I'm gonna have to rethink about telling fairy tales to the younger generation because that's dark. Anyway, that's a total tangent. I don't know. We could have a whole show about how dark and twisted fairy tales are, but that's not this show. What we're talking about today is two really good modern fairy tales. Both fairy tales, I think I've outlined why, but very different ones. So The Realm Surfer, this is good for anyone who really likes religious mythology, different stories about different religions, but you're kind of burnt out on like the Greek myths. Those get played a lot, or a lot of the Catholic mythology or Christian mythology gets overplayed. This goes into a little bit more about the subtleties of the angels and relates it to modern time. Like I said, it has a very clear pro God's will spin on it. There's absolutely, the heroes are on the side of the angels, so to speak. Take that how you will. I still liked it. I thought it was really fun. And, you know, you just kind of read around that. It's still a great story no matter what. And then Matriarch is going to be great for anyone that really loves just like a super straightforward kind of fairy tale with, you know, the old farmers and the magical creatures and the genie and the three wishes and all that. but has kind of a modern twist on all of those classic ideas, and has kind of a chilling twist, a very different sort of ending. So check it out if you love that. Either way, you can't really go wrong because they're both super short. You can read them in one sitting probably. This one took me, I think, about a week to read. This one was a couple of days. You know, try them out. And if they're not for you, you didn't really lose anything. And if you love them, then you found a new writer and maybe a whole new genre to start exploring, because I'm sure there are way more than just these two in Amazon's fairy tale fantasy list. Thank you again for joining me here on Indie Book Club. Next month, the month of July, we'll be reading the political thriller Monumental Encounter by Barbie Kinnison. She's another Las Vegas-related author. So I'm very excited about that. While you're here, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, like the video if you liked it. If you didn't like it, you can hit the down button, or keep it to yourself, either one. But do subscribe if you like these videos, if you like hearing about these books. Go find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, anywhere that you are on social media. We are probably there too, and we will see you next month. Fairy tale.